Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortem, the podcast where we lovingly sift through the ashes of our former faith, one bizarre belief and repressed memory at a time. I'm your host, Hannah.
And I'm your host, Jess.
Hannah and Jess, we got away. Now we're unpacking what they won't say. Behind temple walls and cover-ups. We're pouring tea in your coffee cups. It's the Post-Mormon Postmortem. Digging up what they want forgotten. Trauma, truth, and crime, yeah, we're surviving. It's Post-Mormon Postmortem.
Hey, Eternal Family. Welcome back to Post-Mormon Postmortem Foundations, our series for Nevermos trying to understand Mormon culture. In our last episode, we explored Mormon gender roles, how motherhood became woman's highest calling, while men hold exclusive religious authority. And today we're diving into cultic tactic of control mechanisms that the church uses to shape members' daily lives and maintain authority.
If you've ever wondered how one religion manages to consume so much of its members' time and their money and mental energy, this episode will explain it all. We're talking about a system of unpaid labor, constant meetings, social monitoring, financial obligations, and disciplinary processes that create total institutional control over members' lives.
Jess, you and I both left the church before this policy was instituted, but are you aware that members now clean the chapels themselves?
The chapel? I mean, I remember I think they did. Well, I think they did in Utah when I was a kid. Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not clear on the details. I'm no expert on this. I just know that the church used to routinely hire cleaning companies to clean the church buildings. I mean, it makes sense. Like, the floors need polishing and waxing. And
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of upkeep for those
I
buildings.
do. Yeah, I do remember somebody's dad had a company that did that or something in our local ward house.
Well, you know how pennies are really tight for the church now.
Oh, totally.
You know how times are lean and money's tight and the church has to fasten its belt, as the saying goes. What they decided to do was not waste money hiring people to clean when they already had a whole little army of willing unpaid cleaners that they rotate through the ward directory. Anyway, so that's just one example of the ways that you would be called to give your time and labor. And obviously you're doing it willingly, it's service, you're not doing it for pay. It's a very effective control mechanism, this calling system, where you assign incredibly time-consuming volunteer positions to your local congregation, and the expectation is you don't say no to a calling. I mean, you just don't. Callings are, if you're a woman, they will first ask your husband whether it's okay with him that they extend the calling to you. And if your husband gives his approval, which if he's a righteous priesthood holder, he will, then they will go ahead and talk to a woman, as long as her husband okays it.
We just have to pause for a minute while I shake my head in disgust. It's one of the things about the church that bothers me the most, that everything a woman does must be condoned and approved by her spouse. Drives me fucking crazy, but I digress.
I mean, the point is, you spend so much time on callings, and it just takes time away from your home, from your large family with already children who are starved for attention, and let them starve some more.
In the church, the calling system is presented as spiritual service and an opportunity for growth. But as Hannah's described, it really functions as a massive unpaid labor force that runs the entire church organization. It's not just cleaning the church. It's not just Scoutmaster. Members provide all the teaching, the administration, maintenance, and service that keeps the local congregations functioning. And we talked about this. I want to be clear. The church has a 200 plus $1 billion investment portfolio, but they can't afford to pay people to clean the toilets or teach Sunday school. Everyone should understand this fact. When the LDS Church rolled out the modern calling system in the early 20th century, it was deliberately designed to replace paid clergy with lay members. So by 1930, the church had fully eliminated local paid ministry and shifted all that labor to members while centralizing financial resources in Salt Lake City. So the key message there was serving God is priceless. But the financial reality was keeping payroll at zero is even pricier. And so what they do now is they guilt members into doing it for free by calling it service and pretending that God specifically chose you for this assignment. You're not volunteering, you're being voluntold through divine mandate.
But you know what, Jess? I'm just thinking also we know it's got nothing to do with saving money, does it? It's about eating up your time. It's about controlling where you are, with whom you're spending your time, so that you can't be getting up to nefarious things like speaking to non-members.
No. Oh, 100%. I mean, it's just another control mechanism on the members. And they lay it on thick to make you comply, right? Historically, leaders openly taught that refusing a calling risked losing blessings, losing divine protection, and sometimes even losing your salvation. So Joseph F. Smith, not the original Joseph Smith, but church
Remember the
president
F.
during, yeah,
Like,
remember the F, that
exactly.
one. He taught that turning down callings was a sign of spiritual weakness and compared it to resisting the Holy Ghost. So yeah, this wasn't just cultural pressure. It was doctrinally reinforced obedience training. Callings are, they're presented as coming from God through revelation to church leaders. And when it's presented in that way, it seems kind of spiritually dangerous to decline, right? Or to ask to be released from a really time consuming or difficult assignment because maybe you're needed at home or your job is demanding. No, you can't, you don't want to do that because members who refuse or ask to be released early are seen as lacking faith or commitment to the church. So keep in mind with callings, the bishop didn't call you. God called you. So if you're working full time, raising kids, barely keeping your head above water, and they ask you to teach early morning seminary at 6, you can't say that doesn't work for me without essentially telling Heavenly Father to just fuck right off, right? What this system does, it ensures that active members are constantly busy with church responsibilities. So they have little time or energy for outside activities, for relationships or interests that might compete with their loyalty to the church. And that is by design, as we mentioned. If you're exhausted from your calling, you don't have energy to read things that might challenge your faith, right? If all your friends are from church, you can't risk losing them by questioning. And if every spare moment is consumed by church work, you can't develop an identity outside of being Mormon. So Sunday worship in Mormon culture used to be a 3-hour block. I think that's it. You were 3-hour blocks still when you were going to church, right, Hannah?
Yeah, only
Yeah, such a long day. But in 2019, the church reduced it to 2 hours. So sacrament meeting plus either Sunday school or separate meetings for different age groups and organizations. So just for some historical context, the 3-hour block was introduced in 1980 to replace an older model where members attended meetings kind of scattered across the entire week. Primary on Tuesday, youth meetings on Wednesday, Relief Society on Thursday. Yeah.
Was it just sacrament meeting on Sunday?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, like going to mass.
So, but the consolidation, when they put everything all together on Sunday, it was supposed to, and I say that with air quotes, reduce the burden. But instead, what happened was the church quietly expanded behind the scenes meeting expectations so that members ended up busier than they were before. So, yeah, you get the 2-hour block reduction in 2019, but basically it was just the church taking credit for giving you back time that it originally took from you. So, and don't be fooled, anybody looking from the outside in. This shortened schedule doesn't mean that you really have fewer hours that you're committing to the church. Your Sunday obligations still extend far beyond that. If you have leadership meetings, if you have to prepare for teaching something, but then you also have your temple attendance, your like visiting, teaching, visits, and other responsibilities that can consume your entire day.
Exactly. And consuming your entire day is the whole point, which is why people, when they leave a high control religion, suddenly find that they have an amazing amount of leisure time that they didn't have before that allows them previously unknown autonomy, right? Where it's like, oh, for long periods of time, I have not had a sense of personal agency because every aspect of my life has been controlled. My behavior has been controlled down to, how I spend my time. And that if you're left with little free time for personal pursuits, then how do you really get to know yourself? And how do you really get a differentiated sense of who you are and what you actually like that's separate from what you have been told you like? Um, yeah. Uh, so 2 hours church on Sunday, and then we know that members additionally do spend, while the block might have been consolidated, there are still multiple activities spread throughout the week, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that didn't go away.
Monday's designated for family night, but any other night of the week is, fair game in terms of scheduling meetings and stuff. Yeah. Probably mentioned before, I'm sure I have. I'll probably mention that 100 times again, that when I was little and there were 5 young kids in our house, I mean, my parents had great Mormon family planning and had 4 kids in less than 3 years. No. Yeah. Yeah, they had 4 kids in less than 3 years. Sorry, I had to second guess that because it was like, that's impossible. But
God, your poor mother.
yeah, twins. So 4 under 3. And my dad was and my mum was the Relief Society president. And when I say that Mormons have a devotion to endless meetings, it's no exaggeration.
It's true. They
It's
do.
wild that you can spend all your free time, what's that? In these church-related activities, limiting your exposure to outside influences and creating like your social circle and your dependence. And that's just obviously all within your church relationships, your church circle. As Jess said, the time commitment creates pressure to prioritize church activities over your family, which is so detrimental. You've already got more children than you could possibly parent, and you're going to leave your litter of children to go and conduct meetings that, that we've talked so much about, these worthiness interviews, these temple recommend interviews, these tithing settlement interviews. If you're doing these annually or biannually, think how much time is being consumed by the people going to these interviews and meetings, but the people responsible for facilitating them lands on what bishopric? That's 3 people in the ward. It's freaking
Same.
wild. And speaking of a love of meetings, there is one that fills that need and then some, because it fills a love of need for meetings and operates as a mechanism of further control. And that is the formal disciplinary councils
Ooh,
that
yeah.
function as religious courts with the power to tell members who have sinned, committed some infraction, presumably a violation serious enough to warrant this judicial mock freaking trial situation. We've talked about lay clergy and how, your driving instructor bishop, your dentist stake president, those are the people who sit in these meetings and judge the worthiness of a woman who has cheated, for example. Okay, everything returns to Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. So, once again, we find ourselves there. As Whitney Rose has said, when she and Justin cheated and had affairs, they were both married when they got together, but she was dragged before a disciplinary council. Actually, Jess, did you know that they've changed the language now? It's no longer called a disciplinary council. It's no longer called probation.
Wow, really? Well, probably because they're losing so many members. It's like, we're not going to discipline you. We're going to put you on probation because we want you to stay. Don't leave.
No, hold on. I'll quickly look this up. No, the language of probation has changed as well. So it used to be, it had a very punitive tone. Okay, so disciplinary council is now membership council. So the term excommunicated has been replaced with withdrawn membership. So
Wait.
now we withdraw your membership.
The church withdraws your membership for you.
Yes.
I see. I got it.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
The language, so the degrees of punishment, as it were, without getting too much into the weeds, would be like, you fuck up, you commit a sin, you cheat. And because we know that's highly common in Mormon culture. So you get dragged before this tribunal where you have to be sufficiently contrite and sorrowful. I know so many people who've had this experience who have said it's the most intentionally shame-inducing, humiliating, made to feel like an 8-year-old called before their parents and have a finger wagged at you. By who? By someone with made-up authority over you? Who's going to determine whether or not you can stay in the church? Which, incidentally, if you believe this shit, is your entire family salvation for eternity. The idea that you could just arbitrarily have it removed by these fuckers?
It's insane.
So offensive, right?
It is.
Anyway, so again, I know people who've been seriously harmed in this process. It's obviously gendered. Anyway, so probation, if you get, because it used to be what you got. If you get put on probation, you can't bless the sacrament, pass the sacrament, take the sacrament, everything visible that makes it so that people can see you've been naughty, right? You wear your scarlet letter.
Mm-hmm.
You can't bless your baby. You can't baptize your daughter.
Shame.
Everyone needs to know that. Yeah.
Well, and if you think it's not common, I mean, this happens a lot. These disciplinary / membership councils, there are so many reasons why you could get called before the council, like adultery, as Hannah mentioned, sexual relationships outside of marriage, apostasy, criticism of church leaders, violation of temple covenants, you name it. They've got a laundry list of reasons why. And the standards are applied inconsistently because you've got these lay clergy members, executing the operations of the councils. And so some members are going to face discipline for behavior that others engage in with zero consequences. You just never know how it's going to come up for you. And these councils go way back, right? Even Brigham Young held them, often publicly, not in private. And early councils sometimes imposed punishments that would range from labor assignments to literal physical penalties. But by the mid 20th century, the church formalized them, right, into bureaucratic procedures because they were growing up, right? They wanted to be respected. So they kept, though, the all male structure and then imposed like the secrecy around them. And today, like, even the accused isn't given a transcript of the meeting. You're not allowed to go in with representation. Decisions made by the council are considered revelations, meaning you're not just arguing against a bishop, you're arguing against Heavenly Father's supposed will. So, as I said, you can face one of these disciplinary or membership councils for publicly criticizing a church policy. But bishops who cover up sexual abuse, they just get quietly shuffled off to different wards. You can get, and I've got to use the term excommunicated because that's what I grew up with. I mean, you can get excommunicated for being in a same-sex relationship, but men who commit domestic violence, they just get counseled and they stay in good standing with the church. So it is the system protecting itself, safeguarding institutional reputation and male authority while punishing anybody who threatens either one. The disciplinary system, I think, at its core, just creates fear and compliance by demonstrating that the church has power to formally reject and shun you if you violate their expectations. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but you're going to hear me say this hundreds of times. All of these are run by men, right? This is Mormon church writ large. It is all men. So if you're a woman facing discipline, you sit in a room full of men who ask you detailed questions about your sex life, your thoughts, your worthiness. You have no advocate, no representation, no right to defend yourself effectively. It is designed, as Hannah said, to be humiliating and degrading. And until the 1990s, church members facing discipline were sometimes asked explicitly sexual questions that would make your human resources department like burst into flames. Like, they want the nitty-gritty details. They think it is their right. And they're still refusing to allow, if it's a younger person, parents or advocates in most disciplinary interviews, despite ongoing criticism because of the types of questions and the types of conversations that go on here.
You might be asked to relive your trauma to these clowns, to these know-nothing clowns. Just asking probing questions to satisfy their voyeuristic curiosity.
So gross.
Can you tell it pisses me off?
Yeah, I know. I'm feeling hot and
Well, it's
frustrated.
part of if you grow up in a culture where you are encouraged to surveil and police and judge and gossip, it feels very like a natural extension of that.
It does. But also I think the threat, of discipline, it silences criticism and dissent. It makes public questioning of church policies or leaders potentially dangerous to you, right? Because it threatens your religious standing and social relationships, particularly in places like Utah.
And your belonging.
Yeah, your
But
belonging
your
there.
belonging in the community is conditional. So your worthiness, your sense of value, and the love that you get, and the approval and the belonging that you feel are tied to your obedience, to your performance of orthodoxy. So
100%.
you're going to probably work very hard to maintain a sense of belonging at all costs. It is one of our fundamental human needs, after all.
It is. It is. And if you're not working hard, there's somebody that's watching you who's going to report back to the church and let them know, where you might be coming up short. And if you need to become a project for members to care for and look out. I wasn't exaggerating. The church does assign members to monitor and care for each other, and they do it through programs that are kind of like ministering, which is like the visiting teachers that come to your house. Members are given specific families to visit and check on and report about to church leaders. So, what it does is the system it creates a network of informal surveillance where members' church attendance, their compliance with standards, and family situations are regularly monitored and reported to leadership. I I heard this phrase once and it made me laugh, but I think it's so apt. It's the phrase is it's surveillance with the casserole, right? So the modern kind of ministering program, replaced home teaching and visiting teaching, which were introduced in the 1960s, which were part of the church's corporate style like correlation program. So reports of members' activity used to be tallied monthly and set up the hierarchy, essentially a spiritual KPI system. So leaders literally tracked metrics. And in 1980, the church bragged in general conference that home teaching compliance had hit 75%. So imagine being super excited that 3 out of 4 families got a monthly spiritual inspection. But that's what happened.
Oh, do you remember what it was like when the home teachers came and your parents like corralled you all and it would be like nighttime and you're in your pajamas and nobody wants to gather? And it's like kids, like like the expectation is like you will get to the living room and listen to what the home teachers have to
Right.
You will listen to their message while they make small talk. I mean, there's just nothing wrong with that connection, but I think our nervous systems hopefully are attuned enough to be able to tell whether someone is being sincere or not. And so if you're just checking a box, then it's no connection at all. But as you said,
Right.
it's probably more about, as Steve Hassan and other cult experts have said, it's more about surveillance culture, right? It's more about the expectation is that you'll report back. If your home teachers heard that, your husband was struggling with alcohol or something, you can't imagine that would stay between the two of you.
Don't be silly. That's not staying, and that is not a safe space to share that information.
Exactly. So then it begs the question, well, how useful is this system then? Right? If it's just about, if you're having a difficult period, and I know people will have many anecdotal experiences of when their home teachers have been lifesavers. I know that. We're talking systemically, and I mean, I'm sure there are many equal experiences where they were as equally unhelpful or maybe even harmful, but maybe we
But
don't.
nobody remembers those or reports those. They only report out the ones that confirm what it is they want to have experienced, and that's like extremely helpful. Home teachers who showed up at just the right moment and answered all of our prayers.
Right. So speaking of like cult control tactics, um, a lot of them relate to, as I said, they're all fear-based, right? So it's a fear of not belonging. It's a fear of, well, I guess, fear of eternal consequences, but
Mm-hmm.
in its root, that is its fear of not belonging, I would say. We have talked in the episodes about the use of tithing uh, and the development of tithing in the church, maybe not so much as a means of control, but if you think about it, a form of financial control is to tell somebody that they have a financial obligation that takes priority over other expenses like healthcare and food and housing. There are those people who get off on being financially abused. Do you know
I'm
that?
not one of them. No, I didn't. Did not
Right.
know that was a thing.
No, they exist, but you have to be so psychopathic, I think, to take advantage of that. But it's a consensual relationship where just it's wild. People will give over their bank details. I mean, they will sign over their paychecks. They will end up being so financially controlled and abused, but they love it and hate
That's
it. So, like,
wild. Oh,
it's a
it
whole
sounds
thing.
horrible.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who experience financial abuse, but then this is consensual, which I guess you could say for Mormons too, right? If you don't pay 10% of your increase to the very wealthy church, you will be excluded from temple worship,
Mm-hmm.
which, just to keep playing the same record, means you can't go to heaven. The only way to attain the highest degree of salvation is through temple ordinances. And the only way to get to the temple is through paying your tithing.
Yeah. In fact, you have to go. You have to go to an annual tithing settlement and meet with your bishop and declare whether or not you've paid a full tithing, and that creates a lot of incentive, right? And pressure to maintain that 10% contribution over time. And then you've got to be prepared to provide your church leaders with information that backs up your claim that you were a full tithe payer. Now, I know it's different and different bishops approach it, and people on Reddit will freak out about this and go back and forth. But when I was at home, my dad had to go to the bishop's office with his tax returns to prove what his gross income was, and they would compare it to his contributions to ensure he had paid 10% of his gross income. I know that it's, people will scream from the rooftops, that's not right, and that bishop was wrong. It doesn't matter. That's one of the problems with having lay clergy. They are untrained. They don't know. So it's ridiculous. And for those commenters who are like, well, if it's God's plan, I'm happy to pay the 10% because I'll benefit so much, from all of the spiritual and other rewards. This bullshit isn't God's plan, people. Like, historically, for the Mormon church, tithing wasn't just 10% of your income. For much of the 19th century, in fact, members paid in livestock or crops or labor and other goods. Families literally were donating chickens, right? Or doing wagon repair. It wasn't until the 1900s that the shift happened, right? The church became a strict income-based model in terms of tithing. And when leaders called for it, members were expected to hand over whatever they earned before paying dents or rent. And that policy was still reflected in modern teachings from prophets like Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson. So if you can't answer yes at that annual tithing settlement, you're publicly declaring that you're not worthy. Never mind that you might be struggling to feed your kids. The church gets paid first, and if not, you don't get into heaven. So this financial obligation creates dependency on the church by requiring significant ongoing investment that members don't want to lose by leaving or becoming inactive. And so it's, not to get too, it's a weaponized, sunk cost fallacy, right? You've paid tens of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. But if you leave now, all that money was for nothing. So you keep paying and hoping that it will eventually be worth it. And for many folks, they're just not realizing that they're digging themselves deeper into financial and psychological debt. And a final comment from me here. The church does not release financials in the United States. The last time it published a full internal financial report was 1959. And since then, members are expected to give 10% of their income with zero transparency on where that money goes. Except, you get these occasional scandals revealing massive investments and shell companies, right? So it's not just sunk cost. It's sunk cost plus secrecy.
I mean, the church might hide it, but the US Securities and Exchange Commission is going to spill all the tea when they levy that $5 million fine.
So, Mormon culture creates perfectionist expectations that ensure members never feel good despite following all the rules. Members are expected to excel at family relationships, church service, personal righteousness, missionary work, and temple attendance all simultaneously. The emphasis on continuous improvement and eternal progression means that current achievements are never sufficient. And God, when I realized this, did that explain a lot about myself growing up. There's always more to do, more to improve, and higher standards to achieve. You literally can never do enough. Do, study for your scriptures? You should do it for longer. Do family home evening? It should have been a better lesson. Home teaching, you got to be more consistent, get there more frequently. Going to the temple, again, not doing it enough. You got to get there more than you are. It's just a constant treadmill that speeds up every time you catch your breath.
100%. I mean, I grew up, I told you, my mum would answer scrupulously, honestly, yes to all the questions in the Temple Recommend interview. And then she would be beside herself, bereft with guilt. I'm not saying that's normal. It's just a culture, doesn't help you heal from that. Saying, and when they ask the last question about whether or not you're worthy, the answer is no, of course I'm not worthy. And I mean, imagine how confusing that would be for the priest leader who's trying to determine whether or not you passed the Temple Recommended. What do you mean you're not worthy? You just said you were because you answered all the questions in the affirmative.
Exactly.
Now I'm so confused. Is there something you need to tell me? No. Well, then you are worthy. No, I couldn't possibly be. I mean, honestly, I cannot relate to the consequence of the perfectionistic culture. I think the root is the same, but because there is this sort of baseline where worthiness is like the minimum, and we know what it means to be worthy. So it sort of means being perfect, because that's the goal, is to be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So then imperfection is obviously just rife with like self-blame. I mean, it's hard enough not to feel crappy about yourself just in the course of human growth and development. But
Right.
if you have the message continually reinforced to you that, yeah, actually, you really aren't doing enough, and you're really not measuring up, and you really should be doing more. I mean, when I say that I was raised Mormon, sometimes people have the expectation that I must have interpolated some perfectionistic tendencies. Maybe I did, but the result for me was just go in the opposite direction and maybe say, well, I'm never going to be perfect. Clearly, this is unattainable, so fuck it. I'll just be, rebellious. I won't be a good kid, because being a good kid is actually setting myself up for failure. It's not even possible. I just find it interesting
Yeah,
psychologically.
well, and I mean, I was the opposite, like, right? It was always like I was just an inch away from the brass ring and I'd miss it, get to college and I'd get a 98 and not 100% on an exam and be devastated. It was like I carried that burden of perfection and always being the best, like, for a long, long time. And it took years to set it down and get to where you are, where it's like, that's the wrong goal, man. That's not what I'm striving for anymore.
Yeah, I mean, obedience being the highest virtue in Mormonism is what is promoted. And, I always say nobody likes being controlled, but then I have to remember some people do like being controlled. So, I mean, to be specific, I should speak for myself. I don't like being controlled. I have an
Nor do
extreme
I.
aversion to being exploited. We've talked about fear-based control mechanisms, And obviously, a huge one is a fear of losing your family eternally, but also in the here and now, right? Losing those family relationships. When members leave the church, they often experience shunning that is could be informal, or actually it could be sort of a coordinated effort among ward members and family members to provide boundaries against, because you're not supposed to associate with people. One of the temple recommended questions is, who do you affiliate with? Do you affiliate with people who are enemies of the church, criticize the church? Well, you would hope that a parent, a loving parent, would say, yeah, my child's not an enemy of the church. If they don't believe the same things that I do, then of course, no, I don't, you know. But there are some people who will sort of take it to its most extreme and say that they need to maintain these boundaries to protect their own spirituality. And so for that reason, they must cut off contact. So social isolation, massive control mechanism to exclude you from the very thing that we need as humans to survive, which is connection.
Yeah. I mean, they justify it, though. I mean, they justify it, as you said, to maintain that spiritual safety so you don't taint them. But also, it's seen as a form of loving correction that might motivate the wayward member to return to the church, and return to compliance, really. So the message is like, well, we still love you, but we can't have you around for Christmas because your apostasy might damage our children's testimony. And that's not love. That's conditional acceptance with a scripture coding. The message is clear and unequivocal. Conform or be alone. And the social consequences of leaving or questioning create really powerful incentives to maintain membership and activity, even if you have serious doubts or disagreements with church teachings. I was listening to this woman on TikTok who just is terrified to lose the community, lose the family, lose everything she has known and loved her whole life, but has serious doubts about the church, about the theology, wants to leave, but feels trapped.
They make the stakes really high.
They do. And the threat of isolation is real. It particularly affects members in heavily Mormon communities, right? Where your church membership determines your access to social and professional and other community relationships. I mean, just like look at Utah. In Utah, your bishop might be your boss's boss. Your kids' friends are all from church. Your professional network you likely met at ward activities. So if you leave the church, it doesn't just cost you your religion, it costs you your entire social and economic infrastructure. It's leaving the church as a complete societal divorce. So the church maintains strict control over information through the correlation program. This ensures that all church materials, teachings, and activities conform to approved doctrine and presentation. Members are heavily discouraged from reading anti-Mormon materials, which can include academic scholarship, historical documents, or critical analysis that doesn't support the church's faith-promoting narratives. What that means is anti-Mormon has become code for anything that makes us look bad. Peer-reviewed academic research, anti-Mormon. Historical documents from the... Pardon?
Historical fact.
Exactly. I was going to say historical documents. If they, even if they come from the church's own archives, they're anti-Mormon. Testimony from abuse survivors, also anti-Mormon. Like if it threatens a narrative, it's labeled dangerous and members are warned away from it. The correlation program, launched in the 1960s, was literally a top-down information purification campaign. It centralized all curriculum, manuals, artwork, and historical messaging under one committee run entirely by, you guessed it, male general authorities. So, and before that, different auxiliaries like the Relief Society or Sunday School published their own magazines and wrote their own lessons. Correlation shut that down. Relief Society's magazine that it had had for nearly a century was just gone. Independent voices, gone. Everything was filtered through one doctrinal bottleneck in Salt Lake City.
Think about it. Before that, maybe the saints in New Zealand or Tonga or who knows, Fiji might have portrayed Jesus as like looking like he was from the Middle East, and maybe
God. Oh, not blonde and blue eyed?
so you can see why you would need to correlate. But seriously, I was thinking, well, as you were talking, if I was a cult, of course I would correlate all the material. That's just one on one. So they're just doing fully what you would expect them to do. When you were growing up, what were you told about anti-Mormon literature?
Well, that it was probably the adversary or Satan, like tempting me and trying to confuse me and pull me away, and that there were lists of books, there were lists of publications that we should never touch. I mean, it was the same lesson, approach that we had about Metallica and Dungeons and Dragons.
Ouija boards, exactly.
Yes.
Mum had me scared that literally it would contaminate you with like evil spirits. She'd say, you must shun it like the plague. You must not touch anti-Mormon literature with a 10-foot pole. Don't go near it. Like, she was passionate about that subject. And I remember her saying, and I was just sort of like, okay. Like, and eventually as a kid, you can only hear that message for long enough before you go like, so can I just clarify, what are you on about? Like,
Yeah,
what?
I need to go and look at this now because you've made
Right,
such
like,
a
I'm
goddamn
sure,
big
yeah,
deal
like,
about it. Yeah.
don't do this. And I was sort of like, what is this stuff? And it would be something like No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brodie. Like something very innocuous, right? That had just relied on contemporary newspaper reports from Joseph Smith's life. And I think the church invented the concept of fake news by saying that newspaper reports from Joseph Smith's youth, when he was involved in his legal troubles, they made up the fact that that was anti-Mormons going back and retroactively altering the record. So you can't
They beat
teach
this current
people
administration to the
it's
fake
anti-Mormon.
news.
It's anti-Mormon. If we don't like it, it's anti-Mormon.
That's true. If it rubs somebody the wrong way, if it casts the church in any kind of poor light, it is anti-Mormon.
I do have a vested interest in really examining Mormon culture, interestingly enough, because I think for the decades after I left the church, I just put it all aside and thought, that's not going to make it. Like, I don't need to examine it further. It doesn't become any more true or any less true by me examining truth claims. If I've decided it's not true, it doesn't become more less true, if that makes sense. So now I really feel this pull to understand, I guess, the culture that shaped my upbringing. And we're talking about sort of control mechanisms. And one of those, I really think that there's something so unique about growing up Mormon in what's called the Mormon culture region and Mormon outside the Mormon culture region. So the Mormon culture region is like the heavily Mormon corridor in the US. It's Utah, Idaho, parts of Arizona, big parts of California. In fact, I can not be bothered to look up and see exactly where it is. But so what this means is, I've wondered about how this sort of shapes a person's view of the world, where everybody almost around you is so homogenous in terms of the social circles that you rub shoulders with and run in. So at school, socially, professionally, your neighbors, your sports coaches, I mean, there is this big assumption that, well, it's not an assumption, it's a truth that you will have more limited social contact with non-Mormons than if you didn't live in that area.
Oh, 100%. When I was in Utah for grad school and my ex-husband residency was there, we would kind of the reverse discrimination would happen because people would ask, us to hang out. We'd go to dinner or some other kind of social event and then learn over the course of the evening that they were members of the church. And we'd find ourselves and knowing 100% they're having the exact same conversation, but just from their perspective, we'd get home and be like, well, that's too bad. They were really nice. It's too bad they're Mormon because we knew we were not going to hang out with them ever. And the result of that meant that we had to have our own community within that broader community because our kids were ostracized. They didn't want to have play dates necessarily with our kids who weren't members. I finally found kind of a mixed group with some more liberal moms who thought it was okay. They were 3. They weren't gonna be contaminated by it. But
To get off of them drugs.
our social group was really constrained to the couples who had come to Salt Lake for either residency or grad school. We all kind of found each other and that's who we could hang out with because we weren't welcome in the circles of Mormons who would have otherwise been peers and folks that you'd expect to hang out with.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be so much harder to leave if all of your neighbors are your ward members versus, I mean, where I live in the Midwest, it's like, nobody would know, but,
Right. No, unless
nobody-
they're monitoring you in your drive to church every Sunday. But the geographic concentration in a place like Utah or the Mormon corridor, it creates economic pressure to maintain your church membership, right? Because business relationships, your employment opportunities, and your community standing can all be affected by your religious activity and your reputation in the church and your standing. Looking at that, historian Leonard Arrington documented that in Utah's early statehood period, the church leaders explicitly encouraged hiring worthy temple recommend holding members and avoiding apostates. And that tradition never fully disappeared. Even today, especially in rural Utah and Idaho, it's common for job applications to ask for church references and for bishops to quietly vouch for or against members' character. It's not written HR policy, it's just cultural infrastructure. And I've heard of people losing clients, getting passed over for promotions, or having their businesses boycotted because they left the church. And in Mormon heavy areas, your temple recommend is basically a credit score for social and professional access. And moving away from Mormon communities can feel like losing access to family, friends, professional networks, creating additional barriers to leaving or reducing church involvement. For my parents, it worked that way for a little bit until they realized they really had no structure. And then they actively sought out the local ward, got heavily invested in the church because they needed that social network and that safety net that they were so accustomed to growing up in and taking for granted, but moving out of Salt Lake, they were denied that. So I had to find it where we moved next. And they couldn't tolerate the isolation and needed to get back to the fold and back to the church and all of the relationships that were centered around Mormon culture and Mormon life. The church structure makes it extremely difficult for members to hold leaders accountable for mistakes, abuse, or poor decisions. Leaders are seen as called by revelation and deserving support rather than scrutiny. Members who criticize leaders or policies face tremendous social pressure. They can also face disciplinary action, as we talked about, and are certainly going to be accused of lacking faith or being influenced by the adversary, aka Satan. You can't question the prophet without questioning God. You can't criticize a bishop without attacking priesthood authority. The system is designed to be criticism proof, and any attempt at accountability is just reframed as an attack on God himself. When you look at the history, it's quite rich. Members who publicly criticized leaders faced really severe consequences. In the 1940s and 50s, LDS intellectuals and scholars who questioned church history were often excommunicated or pressured into silence. The September 6th purge in 1993, that one targeted feminists, historians, and writers whose work threatened institutional narratives. This isn't just cultural, it's a documented institutional pattern. Dissent is punished swiftly, especially when it deals with history, feminism, or LGBTQ issues.
Yeah, part of the mechanism. I mean, you are asked when somebody gets assigned a calling, you are asked to publicly sustain them in the congregation. So the name is presented to the congregation in sacrament meeting. We are calling brother so and so to be on the High Council. We are calling sister so and so to be a Relief Society teacher. And then you are asked if there are any opposed. Okay. And then at this point, if you are opposed, just say you happen to know that the person they're calling is, a philandering tax evader, the idea is that you would raise your hand, right? And I remember asking my parents, so what happens if somebody opposes? And it's like, nothing. I mean, they didn't say that. They said, oh, well, in which case you would quietly take them aside afterwards and ask them, what's the tea? And they would say he's a philandering tax evader. And then what? They'd say, so, like, don't worry about it. I mean, I can't imagine that anything anyone ever brought was enough to make them reverse decision.
Well, no, because it was a revelation.
What do
Right?
I?
It was God who called them to that. He clearly knew about the philandering and tax evasion.
Right, because God who sees all things,
Mhm.
knows all things, would be able to disseminate that information to the priesthood leaders, assigning the orders. Yes, you're not allowed to criticize the choices that God makes. That goes without saying. So, what do you have? You have leadership, and I use that word so loosely. It's just such a tied together with these problematic policies, behaviors of maladapted, probably personality disordered individuals who haven't healed their attachment traumas, which we all have, and their wounds, which we all have. And if you have members who are feeling marginalized, who have legitimate concerns, the odds are they will just be ignored or disciplined because you are not allowed to question leaders. Don't you know that when the church speaks, your thinking has been done? Let's just take the psychological impact of control systems, whatever you want to call these high controlled systems. So obviously, if you are telling somebody what they can and cannot do, how they spend their time, who they associate with, what they can like and dislike, what they want. I mean, when you are micromanaging every aspect of somebody's life, right? If you want to look at Erik Erikson's stages of human growth and development, Where in the stages of healthy human growth and development does being controlled and surveyed fall? Nowhere. It creates psychological dependency, learned helplessness, personality disorders, difficulty making decisions, difficulty with interpersonal relationships. It's black and white thinking, fear-based, right? So uh, I don't want to see the nuance in something. I don't want to consider these shades of grey. It makes me uncomfortable. But here's the church that can tell you, like, no, this is what you think. This is what you,
Right.
okay,
Right.
that's comforting. It also has a psychological impact, right? It doesn't allow you to develop your own thoughts, your own critical thinking skills, land on your own decisions. So the result is not great for the psyche. I mean, Utah has one of the highest antidepressant rates in the nation, one of the highest suicide rates in the nation, especially among youth, especially among LGBTQ youth. Mormon women are much more likely to be depressed than their non-Mormon counterparts in the same geographic area. This to me suggests that there are issues with this pressure to conform and standards that are impossible to keep and a sense of self that is not fully developed. So
No, I agree.
the consequences, they're not small.
No, they're huge. And the control systems also create cognitive dissonance, right? When members recognize problems, but they feel unable to address them, due to their social pressure and the institutional consequences. Because it's like something's wrong, but you can't say it. You see the contradictions, but you can't question them. You feel trapped, but you're told by the church that you're free. So the psychological toll of living in that space is enormous, and it's just gaslighting on an institutional scale. And researchers studying high demand religions classify Mormonism as a totalizing institution, meaning it regulates behavior, beliefs, social circles, identity, and life structure. Sociologists have compared the LDS environment to bounded choice, where members appear to act freely, but every option is constrained by fear of consequences, loss of community, or eternal ramifications. And this framework is used in studying cultic systems, authoritarian groups, and high control religions worldwide. So the psychological impact that Hannah's describing, it often continues after members leave the church as they struggle to develop independent thinking, critical thinking, decision-making skills, and recover from years of institutional control and guilt. Recovery from Mormon control systems often requires professional therapy and significant time to develop healthy boundaries in independent thinking and your autonomous identity. I mean, I've been out for over 3 decades, and I still do catch myself asking, well, what would be the right thing to do here? Instead of what do I want to do? The programming runs deep. So there you have it. Mormon control mechanisms. It's a comprehensive system of unpaid labor, constant meetings, social monitoring, financial obligations, and disciplinary threats that creates total institutional control over members' time, money, relationships, and thinking. And remember, this system didn't arise by accident. Every piece of it evolved over decades of doctrinal tightening, bureaucratic expansion, and cultural conditioning. Mormonism today is the product of 200 years of refining obedience, loyalty, and information control into an art form. Next time, we'll conclude our foundation series by exploring why people leave the church and what happens next: the faith crisis journey, family relationship deconstruction, cultural identity loss, and the whole process of rebuilding life after Mormonism.
Exactly. We talked today about the reasons people stay, the mechanisms that keep people controlled. Next episode, we'll discuss why people leave and the grief that that can entail as your worldview completely shifts, and the post-Mormon community that people find, how people create new meaning and purpose as they walk away from everything that they once believed was eternally true. Until then, remember, if your organization controls your time, money, relationships, and access to information, while claiming that it's all for your spiritual benefit, you might be Mormon.
I would bet money you are. So thank you for listening. Before we go, massive thanks to Hannah W. for her incredible theme song, Dr. Dave for guitar, and Mick for making our music sound professional. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow along on TikTok and Instagram at Post-Mormon Postmortem. And if this resonated with you, consider supporting us on Patreon at Post-Mormon Postmortem. Until then, next time, Eternal Family.
Hey, Jess, sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
Hey, Hannah. Sorry for what I said when I was Mormon, too.